it's only by the organizer. Only organizer can start it.
Oh, okay.
I've started it. I've started it.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I never record myself, but I see that someone is like always recording. So what I'll do is like I'll download that video and share it with all of you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I see that there is a lot of lag in between. So even though the audio is synced with the video, but sometimes a few frames in the video they go missing. So that's what my observation was. You tell me like if I mean once I share the videos with you, you can tell me like if something is wrong with the videos or not. Okay. Anyways, we'll come back to PCA. So far what we have discussed is this is like a quick recap. So we want to maximize the variance in our projected space. And in the very first lecture, when we discussed about PCA, I told you that this is equivalent to minimizing the projection error. Is there anyone who went through that video, who had gone through that video which I shared? So this is equivalent to minimizing the projection error. So let me just give you a small proof for it, why this happens. Okay, so let's say this is your data set with one such example. This is easier to understand it that way. I mean, your data set might have enough examples, but let's say this is one such example from your data set. Okay, I am assuming that this data set has been I mean, normalized, and it has been centered around origin. So this data set is centered around your origin, basically 0, 0. So here we have two dimensions, x1 and x2. So now, just use another color. Okay, are you able to see the screen, right? I mean, I'm writing it on the screen. This shouldn't be a black screen anymore.
No, sir, it's visible.
Okay.
It's visible, sir.
All right. So let's say this is the axis along which we want to project. Okay. Now, this may not be the axis where the variance is maximized, but for now, assume this is just one axis along which I want to project my data. Okay. And if you remember, there are some constraints along this axis U1, and the constraints were that the norm of this U1 is 1. Okay. So this is one of the constraints that we set. I had given you a motivation of like why we decide that the norm of this U1 is 1. Okay. So what we do is like our goal is to find a projection of this data point onto this axis U1. Okay. Now, because this data set has been centered around origin. Okay. Look at this. So let me just write it in different notation. So let me just call this as A, this as B, and this as C. So B is your projection. Basically, I would say projection distance. So if there were, let's say, 5 points, so my goal was to minimize the distance of B1, B2 plus B3 plus B4 plus B5, right? If you remember, as per this definition, we say that we want to minimize the projection distance. So this is what we were interested in doing. So we want to find an axis U1. Basically, we want to minimize this with respect to U1, which gives us this least distance B1 to B5. Okay. Now, look at this. I'm giving you a slight mathematical intuition here. So as you know that this triangle is a right angle triangle, so it will follow like Pythagorean theorem, Pythagoras theorem. So you can say a square plus b square equals to c square. Okay. If you don't understand anything at some point in time, please unmute yourself and discuss with me. Okay. So now
I'm sure, sir.
Yes.
Okay, never mind. I don't think it's relevant. It's b square plus c square equal to a square.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. My bad. Thanks
No,
for
it's
pointing this
okay.
out. No,
I don't know if
still.
it's relevant, but
No, this is very relevant. This
yeah,
is very
yeah.
relevant. Thanks for pointing this out. This
Okay.
is like such a clumsy mistake. Okay. Okay. Right. Thanks for pointing this out. That means you're attentive. Okay. So as you know that A is the distance of this origin to your data point X, right? And that is supposed to be some constant value. So this will not change. So this will not change regardless of wherever your axis U1 is. So do you agree with that? In this two-dimensional space, my original data point will not change once I have, centered it around origin. Even in the original space, even if I didn't center it out around origin, the distance of this point from this origin will be a constant. Okay. Now what we are saying is we want to, and the sum of this b square plus c square is equal to a constant, right? So if you increase b square, what will happen to c square?
It decreases.
It decreases, right? And what is b? That's the projection distance. So if you go back, b is your projection distance. And now what is c? Oh, sorry. And if you look at c, what is c? C is the width. C is the width. So so c is the width from the basically from the origin to the projection. So this width that you see, C. Now what we are saying is, if there was another axis U1, so let me just draw another axis U1. Okay, let me use another color. Okay, so let me just draw another axis, let's say this U1. Let me call it U1 prime. Okay, now I'm projecting this data point again onto this U1. What do you see? If you drop a orthogonal line onto this axis U1 prime, this value C would be more than, let me just call this value as C prime. So this C prime in green is greater than this C in red, right?
Yes,
Are
sir.
you able to analyze it? So
B,
what is
B gets smaller, so
B gets smaller, so hence C gets higher. That's like the converse of it.
yes, sir.
And what is C actually? C is the width. It it emphasizes your variance. So how varied this became once you drew a point or once you projected a point onto some axis where the projection error was minimized. So it became more diverse, right? So I hope this gives you a mathematical intuition of if you minimize the projection distance, the width gets maximized, and that width is nothing but the variance aspect, right? What is variance? Variance is nothing but deviation from the mean, right? So let's say this is some axis U1 prime. And here, let's say there were some projections and which are, so basically the width is very high. So from the origin that we have, if I compute these distances, these would be higher as compared to some other prime, some other axis U, right? If this U1 prime had, say, if that I would say if the projection distance of U1 prime is less than a projection distance of U. So that is what we are interested in. So far I have given you a mathematical intuition that if you minimize the projection distance, your variance tends to get maximized. Okay, now coming back to where we were yesterday. So just give me a second. So we were trying to figure out that particular axis, and let me call that axis as U1, which gives us the maximum variance. So we inserted. So this is the variance of your projected data. So we inserted U transpose Xi as your projected data and U transpose X prime as your projected mean. And we figured out that this boils down to maximizing this equation. And if you solve this equation, so this equation is solved by differentiating this maximization equation with respect to U1. So if you differentiate this equation with respect to U1, you get to this eigen equation. This equation tells us that lambda1 is an eigenvalue for an eigenvector U1. And this eigenvector U1 is for this matrix sigma, and sigma is nothing but our covariance matrix. So far what we have observed is we have to figure out that particular eigenvector which has the highest eigenvalue, and that eigenvector comes from this covariance matrix sigma. So let's say I have another axis. So let me just go back to this. So say suppose this U1 dimension was the one. So there is some data set. And this U1 dimension is the one which gives you, say, the maximum variance. Now, let's come to that another dimension U2, which is nothing but orthogonal to it. Let's figure that out, which is that dimension. So one constraint that we have is this U2 transpose U1 should be equal to 0 because they are orthogonal to each other. And this is nothing but we are simply doing the dot product. U2, U1 being two vectors, if they are orthogonal to each other, if you take U transpose U1, you'll get to 0. And the same constraint that we had for U1 also. So here also this will hold for U2. The norm of U2 will still be 1. OK, so this is the same constraint that we had earlier. So now having these constraints, we try to figure out what this next dimension U2 will be. OK. So we are trying to maximize U2 transpose sigma U2 with these two constraints now. So here we will have, so because we have two constraints, so we will have two Lagrange multipliers. So let me call these Lagrange multipliers as lambda2 and eta. So you will again differentiate this with respect to U2. What you will get? So 2 sigma U2. This term will get cancelled out. What would remain is 2 lambda2 U2, and this one would be plus eta times U1. And this would be now equal to 0. So this is the derivative. Let me call this as J. So this is the derivative with respect to U2. Now I'm going to do one simple trick. I'm going to multiply this equation with U2 transpose. So on both ends. So this would turn out to U2 transpose sigma U2 minus 2 lambda2. Basically, because lambda is a constant, so U2 transpose U2 plus eta is again a constant. So eta U2 transpose U1. What is U2 transpose U1? This is 0 because these vectors are orthogonal to each other. What is U2 transpose U2? This is 1. So what this equation becomes? This equation becomes lambda2 equals to basically 2 lambda2 equals to 2 times U2 transpose sigma U2. You can cancel 2, and so this is the same thing that we get for lambda1. If you remember, lambda1 came down to U1 transpose sigma U1. And if you look at U2, this is, I mean, the same, but this is with respect to U2. And so originally we started with this equation. So what is this? This is lambda, right? Lambda2 basically in this case. So because we know that lambda1 is our vector with the highest eigenvalue, so lambda2 must be the vector with the next highest eigenvalue, right? Because these two vectors, even though they are orthogonal to each other, we still want to maximize this eigenvector corresponding to the eigenvalue lambda2. So now lambda2 becomes the next next eigenvector having the next highest eigenvalue. So from these equations, so if you solve it for again U3, so let's say if your data set was say 3-dimensional, you can go to U3 and have another constraint. So if your data set was 3-dimensional, so let's say if your data set is now 3-dimensional, what you can do is first you figure out, let's say this is U1, then you figure out what this is U2, and then you will figure out what U3 is. So corresponding to U3, there will be two more constraints. So U3 transpose U2 would be 0 because these axes are orthogonal. And norm of U3 would be 1. So you can again solve the equation that we have, and what you will see is that lambda3 would be what? U3 transpose summation sigma U3. So if you solve that equation, you will get down to this. So essentially, these equations are telling us we have to figure out eigenvectors of covariance matrix sigma. So we have to figure out the eigenvectors of this covariance matrix sigma, where lambda1 corresponds to the eigenvector. Basically, lambda1 is the eigenvalue, or rather, let me say the highest eigenvalue, the largest eigenvalue, and the eigenvector corresponding to it is what we are interested in finding. Similarly, lambda2 is the next highest eigenvalue, and we are interested in finding the eigenvector for it. Okay. Now, you if you are there, please discuss with me. All I'm asking is, given a matrix, let's say A. In our case, this matrix is sigma, the covariance matrix. The sigma is a D cross D matrix. Okay. All I'm asking is, if you want to figure out this, let's say the eigenvectors of this matrix A or sigma, how will you do it?
A minus lambda equal to 0.
So A minus lambda equals to 0 will give you the lambda values, not the eigenvectors.
Yes, sir. So we get the lambda values and we construct the eigenvector.
So what you will do is, so let me call let's say the value, the highest eigenvalue. So if A is 3 cross 3, you will get lambda vector to be a column vector with 3 values, lambda1, lambda2, lambda3.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what you will do is you will try to figure out the first vector, v1. So let me call this first vector as say x1, y1, z1. You know that the lambda values could be figured out from this equation. Let's say lambda1 is 5. So 5 times x1, y1, z1. What will this equation boil down to? So this equation will boil down to 3 linear equations that you can solve and figure out the values of x1, y1, z1.
Yes, sir.
So you can, once you have computed x1, y1, z1, you know the eigenvector corresponding to the value 5. Similarly, you can repeat this process for lambda2. Let's say lambda2 is 3. You repeat this process, you will get the eigenvector for the value 3. And I mean, if you go on, you can do it for lambda3, and correspondingly, you can get all the eigenvectors. Can you tell me what is the issue with this approach? Okay, do you remember that? Okay, can you tell me what is the concept of like rank of a matrix? Do you remember that topic?
Sir, can you repeat that? Sorry, my internet connection is unstable as well.
Do you remember what do you mean by a rank of a matrix?
Oh, yeah, sir. The echelon form of that matrix with the non-empty rows tells us the rank of it.
Or non-empty columns. What is the
Yeah.
minimum number? Depending on whichever is minimum, if you try to do some mathematical operations, if you can reduce the rows, considering rows to be minimum, or if you consider columns to be minimum, you try to get the non-empty ones and see whichever value that you get is like the number of non-empty rows. Let's say I'm reducing the rows. So the number of non-empty rows would be the rank of the matrix, right? And if the number of non-empty rows is equal to the number of rows in your original matrix, then this matrix is what?
Highest rank matrix.
Okay. Let me just relate it to a property. So can you figure out the inverse of any matrix?
Yes, sir. Given that its determinant is not 0.
Okay, there is no other property.
It has to be
Okay, what do you
what
mean
do you
by
call it?
determinant of?
No.
Rank,
It has to. There is a term. There is a term.
there is a property. The property says that you cannot find the inverse
Independent
of
columns and rows or something like
that. That property itself is about rank. The rank
Oh.
of the matrix should be equal to the number of rows that you have, basically non-empty rows. So the
Yes.
rank should not be reducible.
Yeah.
This,
Yes, sir.
so you can only reduce the rank because the rows or columns, they have redundancies. They are correlated.
Yes, sir.
So the same concept, if you think here, what is sigma? Sigma is covariance matrix. So in sigma, we have, so if you look at any entry of sigma, let me call this entry, let's say some entry as ij. So sigma ij is telling us how feature I is correlated. I will not use the term correlated, but how feature I impacts feature j, because correlation is something else. So how feature I impacts feature j. So this value is actually telling us if it has a positive sign, whatever the value may be, if it has a positive sign, then I can say, yes, they are positively correlated. So if I increase some value in feature I, it is going to have a positive impact in that value in feature j. If it has a negative impact, you can say they are inversely impacted. So if you increase one value in I, correspondingly, the value will go down in j. And if it is very close to 0, if the amplitude is very close to 0, which means they have very little impact onto one another. Now, because we are interested in finding out the eigenvectors of this matrix, I just told you that this matrix has to be invertible. I mean, for you to figure, so there is this one property when you try to decompose this eigenvectors, you just said that the determinant should not be 0, right? If the determinant is 0, you will not be able to inverse this matrix.
Yes, sir.
Invert this matrix. So in general, if you use this way of solving, eigen equation for any, and one more thing, you cannot, find the eigenvectors of a matrix which is not a square matrix. So this particular derivation only works for square matrices. Okay, and one property of this matrix is that this matrix is a symmetric matrix. Basically, because sigma ij would be equal to sigma ji. I hope you are able to visualize this. See, what is sigma ij? Sigma ij is nothing but the individual products of the element. So it is the sum of element-wise multiplication in feature I and feature j. So I can write this as xj and xi. So sigma ij will be equal to sigma ji. Okay. Now, how do we get to the eigenvectors if we are unable to solve this particular scenario where this sigma is a non-invertible, where the rank of this matrix is not equal to the number of rows in this case, let's say D. If the rank is less than D, so how do I find these eigenvectors? So people, and moreover, this is like computational intensive. The process that we, the process that we do to figure out these eigenvectors, where we try to do A minus lambda I equals to 0. So that is a computational intensive process as well. So one way to resolve that is people use singular value decomposition. So this is another technique. I would say this is a generalized eigen. So it is a generalized eigen technique. This technique can work for any kind of matrix. So it can be any rectangular matrix as well. So if the matrix is even rectangular, you can still find out what the eigenvectors are. So my goal is to figure out. So my goal is to figure out what are the eigenvectors of this matrix A. So if you want to decompose this matrix A, so I'm going to decompose this matrix into 3 different matrices. So if the dimensions are for A, it is n cross D. So U would be a n cross n matrix. Okay. This sigma would be rather, let me say this would be so this would be some n cross k matrix, and this would be some k cross n matrix. Okay. So this I shouldn't confuse you with this sigma. So let me just call this as the eigenmatrix.
Sir, K cross N, not K cross D.
K cross D. Sorry, K cross D. You're right. Because the final resultant should be n cross D. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for pointing this out. So what we are interested in having is these 3 matrices: U, eigen matrix, and V. This. So let's just look at what U is. So U is your matrix of eigenvectors. U1. So this is first vector U1. This is U2. This is U3. U4. So you will have UN such vectors. Your sigma is what's the size of sigma? Sigma is n cross k. So it's n cross k. So you will basically have n rows. So you will have n rows, and along the diagonals. So they are not exactly the diagonals because it's not a square matrix. However, if you start from the very beginning, so along these entries 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. So along these entries, you will have eigenvalues. Okay, let me just ask you a question. If a matrix has a size of n cross D, how many eigenvectors would be there? Or let me just rephrase it. So far you have studied it for square matrices, right? So let's say a matrix has a size k cross k. How many eigenvectors would be there, and how many eigenvalues would be there?
At least K, sir.
At least okay, at least k. That is right.
Sorry,
but
at most.
No, I mean it would be exactly k, but some of the eigenvalues could be
Will
0.
be repeated, right? So
okay. I'm not saying the vectors are exactly the same. I'm not talking about unique. I'm just asking, like, so there would be exactly k such eigenvalues and k such eigenentries. So in this particular case, n cross D, whichever has the minimum value, those many eigenvectors would be there. So for a matrix n cross D, if D is smaller, you will get D such eigenvalues. If n is smaller, you will get n such eigenvalues. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to convey here. So this is the eigenmatrix. And finally, if you look at the matrix V, so V is actually not important to us. So lambda 1, so there would be some values, say lambda 1, lambda 2, till some lambda k. See, because after the kth entry, there would be no such eigenvector there. I mean, there is beyond this kk, you will not have any entry, right? So you have k such eigenvectors, basically k such eigenvalues from this eigenmatrix. So whichever value is the highest, so let me say lambda 5 comes out to be the highest. So that would become my first vector along which I will project my data. Okay. So corresponding to lambda 5, there would be some u5 here. So this u5 would be the eigenvector along which I will project my data. So this is how, I mean, usually PCA is solved. So if you are comfortable with Python, SVD function is there. You can use it. Even you can use the eigen function. So I mean, I'll just tell you this for your knowledge sake. There is a eigen function in your Python, as well as there is a SVD function there. So in the eigen function, as I told you, that if a matrix is non-invertible, you cannot really find the eigenvalues. Sorry, you cannot really find the eigenvectors and eigenvalues correspondingly. So what they do is they try to compute the pseudo inverse in order to, in order to approximate it to the actual inverse. And this pseudo inverse is actually invertible. They do some, I would say, minor alterations to your original matrix, and then they ensure that this matrix is invertible, and then they figure out. So you would ask that even though my matrix is not invertible, but eigen is still working on it. So there they are not actually inverting it. They are trying to approximate a pseudo inverse for it, and then they compute it. So let me just talk about like a few limitations of PCA. Okay. Okay, I'll talk here itself. So far what we have done is we have realized that we have to figure out the eigenvectors of this matrix sigma, which is our covariance matrix. The eigenvector having the highest eigenvalue, so lambda 1, assuming this has the highest eigenvalue, this will be my first. So corresponding to this, let's say u1 is the eigenvector. So along this u1, I will project my data first. The next eigenvector along which I will project would be, say, having the value lambda 2. So this is the next highest eigenvalue. And corresponding to the eigenvector having the next highest eigenvalue, that would be my u2. So this is how, okay. So this is how you will pick these u1, u2s, and so on. Now, how do I decide, or how do I know which vector has what importance, or what is the importance of each of these vectors? So how do I know how much variance is captured by each of these individual vectors? Okay, so as you know that there are, let's say, so we were trying to decompose a D cross D matrix. So there must have been D such eigenvectors having D such eigenvalues. Okay. Okay. So you can assume that they are in sorted order. Basically, these are in decreasing order. So lambda 1 has the highest value. Lambda 2 has the next highest eigenvalue, and so on and so forth. Okay. So in order to capture how much importance this u1 has, what you can do is you can figure that out by normalizing the weights with respect to the eigenvalues. So whatever this value is, so let's say this comes out to be, say, 0.6. So you can say that u1 is capturing 60% variance in my data set. So the weight, the eigenvalue that you have tells you how much important a vector is. The normalized weight tells you how much variance is actually being captured by that particular vector or the corresponding vector for that eigenvalue. So if somebody asks you, I have to preserve, let's say, 95% variance in your data set. So you give me a low dimensional representation where I have to preserve 95% variance. So what you will do, you will try to figure out what is the, importance of u1. So you will try to figure out what is this value, lambda 1 plus lambda 2 till say lambda d. So let's say this comes out to 60% or 0.6. So this will be like 60%. U2 comes out to be say 20%. So you will go till that value of k where the sum of these variances go to 95%. So this k that you pick, obviously this k would be less than d. So this k is the number of dimensions that you will pick in order to project this data. So let me call this matrix as U, where I am picking k such dimensions. And each, if you look at each row, so if you look at each row, there would be d such values in each row. So the total size of this matrix is, d times k, right? Because each vector would have a component for each entry. So if you look at each vector, this will have a component for each entry, right? Each dimension that exists in your original data set. So this is your, you can say the matrix that you pick. So original U is U1, U2 till UD. So out of these, you pick those columns that, so correspondingly, let me call this the eigen matrices, having the values say lambda 1, lambda 2 till lambda k. So whichever eigenvalues were the highest, you pick those particular columns. So this is that particular matrix where U1 had the highest eigenvalue, U2 had the next highest eigenvalue, U3 had the next highest eigenvalue, and so on and so forth. So these are the k columns that are picked from this decomposed matrix U. Now you may ask, so how do I project? So how do I figure out if I have a new data point? How do I project that particular data point onto this k dimensional space? So this is very simple. So let's say if this data point is k, which is d dimensional, what you will do, you will simply do U transpose X. U transpose, as you would know, is, so this k dimensional matrix, d times k. So this would be k times d. X is your d times 1. So you would get a k cross 1 matrix, essentially a k dimensional vector. So now you have projected your data D with the help of this new matrix U, where this new matrix U comprises of those eigenvectors having the highest eigenvalues. So this is how entire process of PCA is done. Any questions pertaining to PCA which is not clear to you? Any questions? Okay.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir.
Yes. Tell me.
So we see that PCA reduces columns based on maximizing variance using the maximal eigenvectors, right?
Correct. Correct.
So how does TSNE achieve it? It compresses everything to two-dimensional, but it does not lose anything.
No.
How does that work?
It still loses. So it works on the principle of a manifold. Okay. Do you know what a manifold is?
No.
Okay. So let me just give you a very small idea. Okay. Just explaining TSNE, the mathematical formulation for TSNE would take me 3 classes at least. Okay. So I am just going to give you a mathematical intuition. It is a fairly complex. I won't call it like the derivation is fairly easy to understand. However, you would require some kind of understanding of manifold geometry. So let me just talk about what manifolds are. Okay. Now, so assume that you have 2 data points in your coordinate space. Right. Okay, in your coordinate space. And we have 2 data points. Let me call them as M1 and M2. Okay. Now, how do you compute the distance between M1 and M2?
M2 minus M1 and norm of that.
Okay, so what you're saying is I will take So whatever these two-dimensional points are, I will take the Euclidean distance essentially, right?
Right. Yes, sir.
So basically, you're interested in finding the Euclidean distance for these points. So you can write it in this way if you want. This norm is always positive, right?
Yes, sir.
So I can write it as m1 minus m2 also.
Yes, sir.
Now, why did we assume that, this distance is valid? I mean, why we can move in a straight line from m1 to m2?
Because that's the only way we can travel in this two-dimensional space, which is the most
Okay.
minimal from M1 to M2.
The most minimal from m1 to m2, right?
Yes,
Now,
sir.
assume that you had a very high dimensional space. Let me call this as D.
Right.
Okay. Now, the underlying embedding is nothing but that low dimensional space.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So that low dimensional space doesn't really have, I would say a Cartesian space embedded in it.
Yes, sir.
I mean, this is like slightly tricky to understand. So let me just give you an example. So let's say if this is a low dimensional manifold where you can assume it to be like somewhat twisted, like a carpet. So you can assume it to be like a carpet, which is like somewhat twisted. So you can only travel from this point to this point while going like this, not straight like this. Euclidean
Yes.
distance is the shortest distance, right?
Yes, sir, but we can't.
So that's what the concept of a manifold is. This is like in very layman terms.
Okay.
So manifold says that, I mean, there are certain properties. So mathematically, if you want to compute this distance, this is called as the earth mover's distance.
The one on the ground.
So basically, you have to travel from the ground. So the reason being, I mean, the name earth movers is you pick any point on earth. You have to actually, and basically any point on the corners of the earth, you cannot really take the Euclidean distance, right? You have to travel from, you have to surround the earth within a tape in order to measure how far they are. So that's why it's called as the earth mover's distance. Okay. So now how they compute this earth mover's distance, I'm going to give you an intuition because we need it in order to compute like how far these 2 points are on a manifold. So the idea is, so whatever this low dimension manifold that we have, the first assumption a manifold makes is that the points are locally Euclidean. So in order to see if this point, so let me just call this point as M1. So within a local space of M1, you can use Euclidean geometry.
Right.
You can use Euclidean distance. So let's say this is our point M2. So whatever points are in the vicinity of M1, I can actually compute the Euclidean distance within this patch. So now I know that the closest point with respect to this M2 is, let's say, this point.
Okay.
Let me just draw it in a different color. So the closest point of M2 with respect to M2 is, let's say, this point from M1. So along this path, there must be several patches. So
which
you
are
would
closer.
Which are closer, and from there you can use locally Euclidean distance. Basically, within a patch, you can apply Euclidean geometry to figure out what the distance is, and then you can add these distances to find out the distance from M1 to M2. So this TSNE uses this manifold geometry, or you can say this earth mover's distance, to figure out how the projections would look like in a low dimensional space.
Okay. So basically somewhat like gradient descent, and the one with the best matching, so the point with the best matching the slope with the gradient descent slope is
I won't relate it to that. However, it does use gradient descent to optimize its equations. That much I can tell you. Okay. I mean, those are like, and I won't call them entirely dissimilar, what you were just explaining, but let's just not try to correlate those.
No, that's okay, sir. I got the gist of it. Yeah.
So people actually use this TSNE embedding in most of whatever research paper that you will read. You will see this TSNE embedding everywhere. Okay. Anyways, let's come back to PCA. So I told you that you can use singular value decomposition (SVD) to decompose any matrix. However, in our case, sigma is D cross D. So if you decompose this matrix into this, let's say U1, this eigenmatrix, and this final matrix, let me just call this V. So V is nothing but actually our U1 transpose. In our eigen case, why this happens? Because this sigma matrix that we chose, the covariance matrix, that is symmetric. So because of this symmetricity, this V matrix that we have is actually U1 transpose. So this U1 is D cross D. This is again D cross D, and this is also D cross D. But D cross D, but this is like the transpose of it. That's it. Okay. And now, because you know, like what are these decompositions, you can pick. So from this big matrix U1, where you have U1, U2 till UD, you pick up those U1 to say UK, where K is less than D. You pick up those columns. Let me just call them U1 prime to UK prime. So in order to not confuse you. So you pick up those axes, or you pick up those columns where your eigenvectors are the highest. So correspondingly, these lambda 1, lambda 2 till lambda k, let me call them lambda. So these are the highest values amongst lambda 1, lambda 2 till lambda d. So these are the highest values amongst the d eigenvalues that you have. Okay. I hope this is clear. So this is how PCA works. Let me come to limitations. Okay. Has this been taught to you that linear regression assumes a normal distribution? Has this been discussed earlier?
How does it assume it, sir? Like,
okay, so there is, I mean, so whatever equation that you derive, like minimizing the actual minus predicted whole square in order to get to those weights, I can assume a normal distribution on your data and derive that minimizing the actual minus predicted whole square, minimizing the squared error is actually equivalent to assuming a normal distribution of your data.
okay.
I can do that derivation right now, but take my word for it. I mean,
Right.
So underlying assumption of linear regression is they assume a normal distribution. All in all, I can tell you that, I mean, wherever you see Euclidean distance and wherever you see some kind of standardization and normalization happening, where you try to project your data along, or let's say you try to project your data around the origin. So basically, you subtract the mean from all the samples. There you are doing, or there your underlying assumption is of a normal distribution. So here also, before we even start our process, we try to ensure that the data is brought down to zero mean, around the origin, and we also standardize it to ensure that each feature has equal weightage. So once we compute the covariance matrix, no feature should have, I mean, in the sense that the range of a feature should not impact other features. So that's why we ensure that we normalize each feature's range between 0 to 1 or -1 to 1. 1 second, please. My screen froze. Am I still audible to you?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So one limitation of PCA is that it still assumes that the underlying distribution is normal. Okay. So I mean, in layman terms, whenever you see some kind of Euclidean distance being used, there the underlying assumption would be normal distribution. You can actually prove it. If you want, I can share that document with you, and you can refer to it, and you can see that whatever equation that you're trying to solve, that follows a normal distribution underneath. Okay. The second thing is, I mean, it's not a limitation. It's actually a good thing about PCA. They say that even if your data is, say, not following this Gaussian or normal distribution, PCA will still be able to recover a very good, I would say, projection of your data. I will show you a few examples where it is possible. So even if your actual data, or you can say even if the embedding of your data that we are interested in figuring out, even if the low dimensional space in your data, even if that's not Gaussian, that's not normal, there also PCA is still able to recover that low dimensional space to a good extent. So that's not a limitation. However, coming back to the limitation, PCA does not work where the data lies on a low dimensional manifold. If the underlying embedding is a manifold, PCA does not work well there. So assume that you have such a data set. Or let me just draw. So let's say there are 2 moons. So this is called as a 2 moons data set. 2 half moons basically. So you can construct this 2 half moons data set in Python. So you can sample these data points from here. So the data here actually, I mean, or have you ever eaten a Swiss roll? Have you ever eaten a Swiss roll?
Once, maybe like a couple of times.
Okay, so Swiss roll is nothing but a carpet, which is like rolled over and over. I mean, basically, you roll a carpet, right? So that's a Swiss roll. I mean, similar to, so the geometry of a Swiss roll is that. So if you are given a Swiss roll, the underlying, embedded space is actually a manifold. And the manifold looks something like this. Okay. Yeah. So if you take your examples from this rolled Swiss roll, if you create a synthetic data from this rolled Swiss roll and project it to a low dimensional space with PCA, it will not be the same as if. So let me just give you an example to show it to you. I mean, there are certain examples in our slides. Okay. I hope this process is clear to you. Okay. So look at this example. So this is like a very simple example. So this is, let's say, our 2D data. So see, we have to prove that whether PCA is able to recover our original embedding or not. So let's start with the 2D data. So you can assume that this, so given this data, you can actually visualize that this data is normally distributed. There is some mean which lies around here. And this variance is like close to this point. You can actually generate these synthetic data sets in Python. So now I know that my underlying, so I'm assuming that this 2D data is my embedded space. Okay, this is what I will recover at the end. So now what I do is I multiply this data with this matrix W. So this is nothing but a linear transformation which projects every 2D point to a 3-dimensional point. So here you have every 2D points, right? So all the points here are in R square. In this example, all the points are in R square. So if I use this linear transformation, so let me just give you one example. So let's say I have a point, say 1, 2. If I multiply this 1, 2 with this matrix W, which has a size, say 3, 2, right? Yeah, so if I multiply it with this W transpose, which would be now 2 × 3. So this is again a column vector. So this is, let's say, my X. Let me just use this as a row vector. So this is 1 × 2. So if I use, say, X W transpose, what I will get is a 1 × 3 vector. So this 2-dimensional point 1, 2 is now projected to a 3-dimensional point, which is 1, 3, 1 × 3. There, each point, let's say this point is like the 3-dimensional representation of this, say, this 2D point. So now what I have done is I have projected these 2-dimensional points onto this 3-dimensional space using this linear transformation W. What I do next is I apply PCA onto this 3-dimensional space. And then what I observe is this is the low dimensional, the 2-dimensional representation obtained from the top 2 eigenvectors obtained through PCA. Now, if you compare these two, the I mean, I would say that these are fairly close to each other. I don't have these eigenvalues as of now with me, but you can still compare that PCA is still able to recover the underlying embedding that we created synthetically. So I hope that this gives you an idea that if there was a underlying Gaussian embedding, PCA can recover it to some extent in a, I mean, up to a decent level. Let's look to other examples. If it was a non-linear embedding. So let's say this is the original 2D embedding. I apply a non-linear transformation. So this is a non-linear transformation. So using this non-linear transformation, I convert this data to a 3-dimensional space. And once I use PCA, I get this, which is nowhere closer to this. So this means that whenever, so as you would know that PCA is a linear dimensionality reduction technique. So even if there is a non-linear component involved, so the underlying, if the underlying, I would say, embedding involves a non-linear transformation to your projected spaces, then PCA is not able to recover those.